Hello and welcome to this NCFE CPD session exploring the Level 2 New Style English Papers and Mark Scheme as of October the 17th, 2025. My name is Patricia Devlin and I'm a Provider Development Officer for Functional Skills. My role is to support centres through the planning, onboarding and CPD process for NCFE qualifications. So the objective of this session is to explore the Level 2 English Functional Skills Papers and Mark Schemes. So we'll look at an overview, then we'll look at reading, writing and a summary at the end. So firstly, an overview of the changes to Level 2. In the reading assessment at Level 2, there are 3 activities. Comparison and analysis are now assessed across all 3 activities. This has allowed for the removal of the longer style analysis questions. So for the writing at Level 2, guidance on the word range is given for one of the tasks, and this is to ensure that a reasonable amount of words are used to meet the criteria. Online will have a word count and a reasonable estimate in handwriting, so what your learners have been used to. An example of good practice is you could get Level 2 learners to know what 250 to 350 words look like in their own writing, or the number of paragraphs they would normally use, just so they are familiar with it. However, the response must meet the requirements of the word count where given to be awarded this mark. If no word count is stated, then responses must be over 100 words to be awarded this mark. The prompts do not need to be strictly adhered to in order to access all available marks. Full marks are awardable so long as the response is relevant to the question, clear, and otherwise successfully meets the criteria. And here we have examples of the types of questions for Level 2. So you've got write an article, and then the other one is write an email. You can see with the first one, it does say that it needs to be between 250 and 350 words. However, you can see for the email that it doesn't give a word count, but it should be at least 100 words as well. In terms of the writing assessment and how they're broken down, Level 1 and Level 2 will assess 2 of the following: formal letter, article, review, formal email, leaflet and formal report. So we're going to start with looking at some specific questions, such as language and organisational features for Level 2 and what learners are expected to know. So before we have a look at an example, I'm going to go over 3 question types. I'm going to look at writer's voice, language features and organisational features, and what the learners would be expected to know. So for writer's voice, this question is multiple choice and would assess whether the writer's knowledge of tone of voice. So the learners must decide which word best describes the tone of the text. And those listed are the tones that learners should be familiar with. Language features. So here we have a list of the language features that a Level 2 learner needs to know as well. The learner may be asked to identify an organisational feature or to locate information using an organisational feature. They need to know those that are on the list. So let's have a look at a reading paper and responses. In the live session, we were in breakout rooms. However, as this is a recording, you may wish to pause the recording as you mark the responses. Here are a list of the question numbers and the marks available. You may wish to use this to record the marks as you award as we go through the paper. So question 1 is a multiple choice question which assesses the knowledge of the writer's tone of voice. The learner must decide which word best describes the tone of document 1. The learner has put A and the correct answer is A. So this would be given the 1 mark. Question 2 is a 2-mark question. Here the learner must retrieve key information from the text. They need to identify 2 things the writer has done to have a more sustainable lifestyle. And there are 4 possible answers listed in the mark scheme. So you can see here that the learner has got 2 of those, so they would have scored the 2 marks. Question 3 tests the ability to interpret inference. And the learner must find one quotation in the text that implies Kendrick is self-important. So she pontificated, or the use of the word preachy would gain marks. So you may wish to pause the recording so you can have a look at the question responses and the mark scheme, and then I'll go through each question. So I'm now going to go through the responses from question 4 to question 6. So question 4, this requires the learners to interpret language features. And at level 2, the learners may be asked about any of the following features: alliteration, humour, hyperbole or exaggeration, imperative, metaphor, rhetorical question, rule of 3, short sentences, similes, slang, colloquialism, statistics. In this question, learners are asked to explain the meaning of 2 metaphors, squirreled away and minefield. Therefore, placed for 4A would be given 0 marks, as the answer needs to show the understanding that the metaphor means out of sight. However, for 4B, surprisingly complicated, although it's not exact answer from the mark scheme, the learner has given a valid interpretation and this would get 1 mark. Question 5 requires the learners to distinguish between fact and opinion. Here the learner is required to find a quotation from text 1 that is a fact and another that presents an opinion. For question 5A, this response would be given the mark. However, 5B is not a quotation, so it would be given 0 marks. As with question 3, the learner is required to interpret inference for question 6, and this question asks the learner to find one quotation in the text that implies that some of the eco products are not sustainable. This would get 0 marks as the quotation is not about the products, nor does it answer the question. Again, you may wish to pause the recording while you look at questions 7 to 9. So question 7, this is a 1-mark question and the learner must state the percentage of people that make home cleaning products, and the only possible answer is 20. Question 8 is about the use of organisational features. And at level 2, the learners may be asked about bullet points, numbered lists, captions, diagrams, charts, footnotes, sections, subheadings, tables, text boxes. The learner may be asked to identify an organisational feature or to locate information using an organisational feature. So in this question, the learner has to identify the section of the text that tells the reader how to make spray for most surfaces. And the only awardable answer is all-purpose spray. Question 9 is a 1-mark multiple choice question. And this is looking at recognising levels of formality and bias. Here the focus is on vocabulary, and the learner is presented with 4 words and phrases from text 2, and they must select one that best describes the products. The only answer that applies to all of the products in text 2 is D, safe and simple. So next we have questions 10 to 12, and you may again wish to pause the recording while you have a look at the responses and the mark scheme. So question 10, this is a 1-mark question, and the learner is expected to explain the meaning of the word buff as used in the glass cleaner section. Dictionaries are allowed, and this is covered by the advisory in the mark scheme, and you would accept any other valid definitions in the correct context. For question 11, this assesses the learner's ability to detect the point of view of the writer. The learner is expected to give 2 reasons why the writer thinks that homemade cleaning products are a good idea. So less expensive than shop-bought ones, this would get 1 mark. Just some general advice, so examiners will only mark the first 2 answers given. The learner should ensure that their answers only contain 2 parts. And question 12, this is an objective test question to identify different styles of writing and writer's voice. Styles of writing may include descriptive, formal, humorous, informal, informative, instructional, persuasive, and technical. The learner must state whether each of the 2 statements is an example of informative or an instructional style. And there is only 1 correct answer, and these are correct. Again, you may wish to pause for a few moments while you have a look at question 13. So this is a 1-mark multiple choice question. Compare information, ideas and opinions in different texts, including how they are conveyed. Here, the focus is on the writer's methods, and the learner must select one language technique that is common to both text 1 and text 2. The only awardable answer is C. Both use rhetorical questions. So next, looking at section 3, and we'll look at question 14 to 16. You may wish to pause the recording so you can have a look at the responses and the mark scheme. So this question requires the learner to locate the meaning of words using a dictionary or another resource, for example, a glossary or footnote. Here, the learner must refer to the footnote to state what customers need to do to receive a full refund. And the answer is either return the products within 30 days or pay the return postage. Question 15. So this question assesses subject content 2.217. Here the focus is on technical vocabulary and the learner is given two examples, aluminium and parabens, and must find one further example in the text. The mark scheme indicates the range of technical words available in the text. So therefore, in this question, the answer was incorrect. Question 16. This question is about inference and implicit meanings. The question presents two statements from the source text and asks the learner to say what is implied about the cleaning products in each statement. 16A would be given 0 marks, but 16B regarding this is a game changer, using these products will change your life, would get 1 mark as it's valid, even though it is a little exaggerated. Next, we're going to look at questions 17 and 18, and again, you may wish to pause the recording. So question 17 is about organisational features used in text 3. In this particular question, the learner has to identify the organisational feature used for a given purpose. So question 17A, which organisational feature presents the instructions? And the only awardable answer is numbered list. For question 17B, the learner should identify the footnote as the organisational feature that advises customers about cancellations. Question 18. This is an open question about language features used in the text to present the different products on offer. Here, the learner is asked to provide quotations that exemplify exaggeration and the imperative. 18A, exaggeration is easy as pie. This is a valid example of exaggeration and will be given the mark. However, 18B, simple, would be given 0 as it's not an imperative. We'll next look at 19 and 20. So question 19 is a 2-mark multiple choice question and the focus is on bias. The learner must be able to recognise 2 quotations from text 3 that are biased, and the only awardable answers are D and E. So D, we've got everything you need to clean, and E, what's not to love. Question 20 is a 2-mark objective test question, and the learner must decide whether each statement applies to both text 2 and text 3 and write true or false in the answer space. This example is correct and will get the full 2 marks. So here you can see each section and the marks that were awarded and the marks that were available. Next, we're going to move on to the level 2 writing. So in this section, we're going to look at 3 responses to the writing assessment. I will give you some time and you may wish to pause the recording to have a look at the responses and then we'll go through the answers. So here we have Learner A response. You will need to have a copy of the mark scheme and also pause the recording while you allocate marks and then we'll go through. So let's have a look. So you can see down the side, you've got the subject content, detail, content, formatting, structure, organisational markers, language and register, paragraphs and complex sentences, and then SPAG, spelling, punctuation and grammar. The marks available for this are out of 22. So for the detail, the learner scored 1 out of 2 marks. There are no marks for length because the response is too short, and the learners must write within the given word count of 250 to 350 words to get this mark. Learner A has only written 194 words. However, 1 mark has been awarded for the inclusion of detail of appropriate for purpose and audience. For content, this scored 2 out of 3. The response hits most aspects of the brief and is generally effective in communicating ideas, but it needs more development to get full marks. For formatting, 1 out of 2, there is a title for 1 mark. Structure, 0 out of 1, there is an introduction but no clear conclusion. For organisational markers, they scored 0 as there's not enough evidence to reward the use of organisational markers. For language and register, they scored 1 out of 2 possible 2 marks because some of the language used in this response is too informal for a report, but it's generally suited. Paragraphs and complex sentences scored 1 out of 2, so there is some evidence of paragraphing, but there's only 1 attempt at a complex sentence. For spelling, 2 out of 3, so there are some errors, but sentences can be made of them, and the use of other complex words compensate. For punctuation, scored 0 as there are no there are 0 out of 3 marks available. The end of sentence punctuation is not always present, and some sentences begin with lowercase letters. And for the grammar, 2 out of 3, there are no fundamental errors, but syntax is compromised in some sentences. So overall, this learner would be awarded 10 marks. Next, we'll have a look at learner B. So again, you may wish to pause the recording before we go through the answers. So for learner B, the detail, they scored 2 out of 2. So they get the 1 mark for sufficient length, 250 words, and also 1 mark for the use of appropriate detail. For the content, 2 out of 3, so the response does not discuss problems caused to visitors or people in the local area in the question, but the content is relevant and generally clear and coherent. For the formatting, they got 2 out of 2. There is a title, subheadings and bullet points. For the structure, 1 out of 1. There is a clear introduction and conclusion. For organisational markers, they scored 0 as there are no organisational markers. For language and register, they scored 2 out of 2. Only 1 phrase, sort the issue, is not entirely appropriate for a formal report. Paragraphs and complex sentences scored 2 out of 2. There is some evidence of paragraphing and more than 2 correctly demarcated complex sentences. For spelling, 3 out of 3, consistently correct spelling with some ambitious words such as currently and prioritised, and there are only a couple of minor errors. For punctuation, 2 out of 3. It's generally correct. Some range has been demonstrated by the use of commas in the listing, and the correct use of a colon and an apostrophe for omission places the response securely in the 2 mark band. And for grammar, 2 out of 3, there are no fundamental errors. However, there are some fragments in place of sentences, also people who car share, and clumsy sentence structure, but overall 2 out of 3 for that. So in total, that learner was awarded 18 out of the 22 marks. Next, we'll look at learner C. Again, you may wish to pause the recording while you have a look and gather the marks. So for learner C for detail, 2 out of 2. There is 1 mark for sufficient length, 345 words. Had the response exceeded the word count, then the mark for appropriate length would have not been awarded. And there is also 1 mark for the use of appropriate detail. For content, 3 out of 3. The response is consistently effective in communicating information and ideas. For formatting, 2 out of 2. There is a heading, subheadings and attribution. For structure, 1 out of 1. There is a clear introduction and conclusion. 1 out of 1 for organisational markers. There are some organisational markers which help the report to flow, such as today, first of all, and finally. Language and register, 2 out of 2. So language is entirely appropriate for a formal report. Paragraphs and complex sentences. So the paragraphs are generally appropriate and there are several correct complex sentences. So they scored full marks, 2 out of 2. For spelling, 3 out of 3. There is only 1 error, security. Spelling of ambitious words is evident, such as extensive and legitimately. For punctuation, 3 out of 3. A range is demonstrated with the correct use of hyphens and apostrophes for both possession and omission. Some sentences are missing commas, though a comma has been used correctly once. And for grammar, 3 out of 3. There are some subject-verb agreement errors. The sign don't work. However, the sentences are used for effect with the use of imperatives as evidence of conscious crafting. So in total, this learner was awarded the full marks of 22 out of 22. So in summary, sample and practice papers are available on the NCFE website, and guidance documents for the Level 2 will be available soon. For Level 2 reading, the changes are now more accessible assessment of comparison skills and analysis skills. And for Level 2 writing, more accessible mark scheme for both levels, and the duration of Level 2 writing has been increased to 70 minutes. If you have any questions, please let us know when you complete the survey, which is on the next slide. This survey is completely anonymous, and you have the option to either give your email address if you require a follow-up or have any further questions. If you have any questions, you can let us know if you complete the survey. The survey is completely anonymous, and you will have the option to give your email address if you require any follow-up or any questions. You will also find all our upcoming CPD events from our Functional Skills event page on the website, which is linked here. And thank you very much for your time today. Thank you.